All right, good evening. You're live with Faye on YouTube. I'm Faye, so thank you for joining us. We, of course, present to you a different discussion every evening. Different not only from the one we brought you yesterday, but different from the one that you will see on all television channels right now, because we don't feel the need to do what the rest of them are doing. If you want to see the screaming and shouting, please feel free to switch on the television. But we have a great panel lined up for you today on a conversation that I believe is important, on an issue that affects us all, and one that requires attention, not just yours, or the panel, or the media, but of the government of India. And unfortunately, we haven't seen enough attention on this matter. Now, before I go forward, the routine, please like, share, subscribe on this YouTube channel. Tell your friends and family as well, anyone who's interested in conversations where you can actually hear the panelists and figure out that they are in fact making sense. Now, to remind you, this is not a debate. This is a conversation among people who understand our topic and are able to give us perspective. Let me get straight to it and bring you the conversation that we're having today. Now, the CMIE, which is the Center for Monitoring Indian Economy, has put out a fresh report about jobs in July. This is what it says. Nearly 5 million salaried people have lost their jobs in July. Now, taking the total up to 18.9 million. So that's almost 1.9 crore people, salaried people who've lost their jobs since the lockdown began. Now, why is this a concern? Salary jobs are higher paying jobs, which means that once you lose that job, it takes much longer to recover those jobs. Considering in comparison to, say, daily wage or skilled labor or hawkers or small traders with shops, it's much more difficult to get back a salaried job. It also means that if salaried jobs are being lost, then organizations are cutting down, and it's going to be a while before these organizations decide to hire again, because normally when organizations cut down, they learn to live with that shorter, with the smaller team. Now, despite the recovery in overall employment rate, the recovery was driven by the informal sector, according to the CMIE. It was the daily wage laborers and the traders and the hawkers who were able to recover their jobs, but not the salaried people. Now, here's one thing that I will ask my panel, and I want you to also consider. The worrying thing about salaried jobs is that they support entire families. They also bring in PF and health insurance and several other benefits. If we consider an average of 3 people or 4 people dependent on each of these jobs, we're talking about 6.4 crore people at least who've been affected. Now, that's just one report. Let's take a look at the other reports that have also come in at this time. There's a report that's coming from the Asian Development Bank that says it predicts 6.1 million young people between the ages of 15 and 24 may lose their jobs starting now going forward in this year of 2020 if the virus takes roughly till September to be contained. So 6.1 million young people, or 61 lakh people, will lose their jobs going forward if this virus takes, if containing the virus takes longer. The unemployment rate, according to the Asian Development Bank and the International Labour Organization in India, is expected to rise as much as 32.5%, which means effectively 32.5% means 1 in every 3 people in working age will be without a job in the country. So that's a really scary number. That's what 32.5% means. On contrary to this, though, there are 2 other reports. Naukri.com and LinkedIn have put out reports saying things are picking up, albeit slowly, but they're still saying things are picking up. So here are the questions that we're asking. Is this likely to get a lot worse before it gets better? As we enter the festive season, and this weekend is Ganesh Puja, which is a big deal in Mumbai, and after that we have the rest of the festive season. If it continues to be as mute as it is right now, will this mean even more job loss? And what needs to be done to rein that back in? Joining me on this conversation, Professor Jayati Ghosh, who's an economist and teaches economics at JNU. Aditya Narayan Mishra is the director and the CEO of CIEL HR Services. Abhinandan, Sekhri, co-founder of Newslaundry. And we're going to talk about how much attention this story has received in the media. We'll also talk about the bloodbath as far as jobs are concerned in the media. And of course, the very own Akash Banerjee, Deshbhakt, who joins us as well with his perspective. And the other perspective that I will ask Akash about is that of entrepreneurs. Now, we've received a lot of communication from entrepreneurs saying that basically they consider themselves unemployed at this point because many of them have had to let go of their employees, shut shop. And so now they've spent 5, 6 years, putting in all of their savings and all of their work into an organization that has not survived. So what impact does that have as well? And how hard is it right now for entrepreneurs to keep things going? These are the questions that we're asking. Let's get straight to it. Professor Jayati, Ghosh, I know many of my audience members are going to be thrilled to see you on this conversation. Good evening. We keep looking at the CMIE data, and up till now it was largely about the unorganized sector. Now it's talking about the organized sector, specifically to do with July. Do you expect things to get worse before they get better?
Oh, definitely. In fact, unfortunately, the way things are going, this is really just, the tip of the iceberg. I suspect that the extent of job loss is actually even greater than has been captured by the CMI data. And what we're seeing, if there is no change in government economic policy, if there is not a dramatic attempt to revive demand, to create more demand and therefore more job opportunities, it's going to get very, very much worse. And we will not then be able to blame only the pandemic. We'll have to blame the government policy response for that, because it's just not doing what it should be doing. I just want to say, people are thinking, oh, well, lucky informal sector, they're keeping their jobs. Actually, the point is that half of them are self-employed. They can't afford to, they don't lose jobs in that sense. But what they have lost dramatically is livelihood. Many of them are getting 20, 30% of the incomes that they got before. Many of the informal workers who are used to get 10,000, 8,000 are now getting a quarter of that amount or a third of that amount. So it's actually, the distress is widespread, very much among salaried now, it's evident, but also among all of the other informal sector as well.
Professor, I want to understand, and we know economics has a domino effect, right? So these things then lead to other things happening. If we consider, 1.8, 1.9 crore people, salaried people having lost their jobs, what impact does that have on household savings? What impact does that have on the economy, on the larger economy?
Well, it's terrible news for the larger economy because of this thing that we call the multiplier effects. Basically, if you get some money, you will go out and spend some more, and that means your shopkeeper will buy more, and then the producer will buy more, and he will employ more people, or she will employ more people. If you lose money, you lose your job, you lose your wages, you spend less. In the beginning, you will draw on your savings and you'll manage somehow, but you will still spend less. And over time, that spending less will mean that your shopkeeper will sell less, he or she will order less from the producer, they will hire less people. So it's a terrible negative kind of knock-on effect.
Right, and so to just put that in a nutshell, unless the government intervenes, you expect things to get worse before they get better. What could the government possibly do? Because there is an argument of this is happening around the world. What can the government do? How can the government step in at something like this?
Well, in fact, the Indian government has really not stepped in the way other governments in the world have. Pretty much across the G20, we have the lowest kind of stimulus package. So what the governments elsewhere have done, first of all, they've given what we call social protection, compensation to those who lost their incomes during the pandemic, so that they could at least maintain some minimal spending. They have done much more in terms of works programs. I mean, the NREGA is the only thing that has saved us at this point, but that's running out as well. I mean, the 100 days, many states are reaching that 100-day limit. So you'd have to double that limit at least and put much more money in there. Government could immediately actually focus on the small and micro sector, because that's the one that's really hurting. And that lack of demand is feeding upwards into the formal sector. And that's why the middle class is losing its jobs. That's why salaried employment is going down. So immediately you have to revive demand through public spending. And that will then bubble up, if you like, to the rest of the economy.
Right, and I will come back to where this revival of demand can come from, because there's no money, according to the government, to spend at all. But just to bring in the rest of the panelists, Abhinandan Sekhri of Newslaundry is here, journalist, entrepreneur, so hence different perspectives to bring to us. But Abhinandan, not enough attention on this story. Also, for someone who runs a business like yourself, we're seeing a bloodbath in the media. We're seeing a bloodbath in a lot of other industries. Do you believe that this should be more front page than it is right now?
You are on mute, Abhinandan.
Right. Not just right now. I think it should have been front page way earlier. When the lockdown had just happened, I was invited on a couple of panels by your former group, the Times group on Times Now, on Rahul's show. And there were the BJP spoke, they were fighting. I said, look, right now, okay, let's take for granted that there's no option but a lockdown, because if it spreads like wildfire, it'll be too much. But a good idea for all news platforms would be that whoever you can get new panelists every day to come up with ideas. And, you know, I did a lot of reading because I'm not as accomplished. I'm not an economist like Jayati, Ghosh and others. I mean, although I did do my graduation in economics honors, but so, you know, I read about the payment protection program that the US had done $310 billion to begin with, and another $300 billion. And I mean, from what I read, I gathered the logic of governments around the world was that it is, if you let companies or small scale and small enterprise fold up, a very large amount will not restart. So you have to make sure they don't fold up.
Yes.
And while there was a lot of criticism of the leakage in those programs, the logic even by the Democrats and liberals was that we don't mind the leakage, because right now the concern is you make sure it doesn't fold up, because once the engine stops, restarting it is harder than to keep it running even inefficiently. So, but surprisingly, I was called after another 3 days. I said, I have nothing new to offer to you. I gave all the ideas I had that night. I said, make beds, give, you know, orders to Indian small scale industries, charpai banao, taki 10,000 bed. I mean, you can spur growth by this, you know, rather than do Central Vista, you know, just incentivize people to make stuff that could be used at this time. And you know, I gave this example. I have a friend who is in hotels, and he has hotels in India and abroad. In UK, 80% of his salaries are being paid by the government. So he says, I haven't fired anyone there. He says, here, another 4 months, I'll start firing. And I was discussing with a writer on economics that, you know, can we get a piece on this? So in the research on that, I spoke to a few of my friends who are bankers in the financial industry in New York and Singapore. They said, here, the bloodbath is going to start in Jan. Oh, because we guys are going to start getting rid of our teams. I mean, these guys are, you know, they make a lot of money. That's because right now the government is giving us the money. That is why, while Main Street is going down, the stock market is going up, because we are getting paid. We got no money. We're just pumping it into the stock market. But the bloodbath is going to, so I don't know whether Jayati, Ghosh can tell us whether that domino effect is going to pass on here, but all these factors are not factored in. Right now, what is dominating news? Sushant Singh Rajput. What is dominating news? You know, Tablighi Jamaat. There have been no idea-oriented, you know, discussions on this, and that is really concerning. And I said to Rahul, I said, I'm really surprised even right now you want to come and make us fight each other. I was sitting on panels with people who I can't stand, but I didn't attack them at that time. I said, this is hardly the time. Just let's see who has what idea and where are we headed. And from at least what I've gathered from all the people I've spoken to, the bloodbath is yet to come, and that is going to trickle further down. And I understand that we don't have the kind of money to offer through the paycheck protection program and such here, but surely there are some ideas that can come, because money is being spent in a lot of projects that are unnecessary.
Yeah, and you know, here's the thing, right? When we started off, there were many small organizations, startups that said, hey, you know what, we will look after our people, we will continue to pay all of these things. Those organizations are now running out of money because they're running out of business. There isn't enough business coming in. Nobody signed any contracts. There's no revenue. It's becoming more and more difficult to hang on and to continue to pay people, because once you run out of money, then there's nothing to be done. Akash, Banerjee, Mitesh Tulsian has an interesting question, and I wonder if you'd want to comment on it. He says, great panel, but will this lead to social unrest? Self-employment, is self-employment a solution, as government keeps saying? And this is actually one of the things Akash government has said quite a bit. It said, we want to become job creators, not job askers. We want people to sort of be self-employed and self-sufficient and create jobs instead of looking for jobs. Is that a possibility? Do you see that as a possibility?
Well, the government says a lot of things. It doesn't really translate into action. As far as social unrest is concerned, I think one of the points that I really want to make beyond the economics, because Jayanti has that covered very well, let's not forget that there is 30,000 crores in EPFO that has been withdrawn in the last 4 months. I mean, What are we talking about? When does one break his EPFO? Not to mention, it's not very easy to break, is because when you have your back to the wall, that is what is happening at this point of time. So what we saw on the streets of the migrants was because they had no other option. So we saw them on the roads. And the middle class, largely unaffected, was watching this whole tamasha go by. While quietly, a lot of them were withdrawing their EPFO and burning through their savings. So this burning of EPFO money, this burning of savings is not going to last for too long. So A, that's a problem. B, on the social aspect, I am not saying this. The Bengaluru police has said this. As far as the riots are concerned, of course, there was extremist views and there was guerrilla attacks planned. But the Bengaluru police has said that there were unemployed youth who were sitting at home frustrated. These are not my words. These are the police's words. Now imagine when these unemployed youth increasingly are going to be subjected to all the hate politics that we are already seeing.
Yes.
Imagine what is going to happen in the next year. So I don't make predictions on the channel, but here are a very obvious commonsensical things. The economy will continue to go down. The government does not have an escape plan. We will never see a $2 trillion bailout package. And what we will see is, unfortunately, the escalation of hate politics is because there is nothing else. And before anybody says that this is corona, there is so much of evidence. Faye, let's not forget the NSSO data. The NSSO data that was so ridiculed, the NSSO that disappeared into thin air and was completely reconstituted. We were in a bad state last year.
Even before. Yeah.
And then this has happened.
Yeah. You know, Akash, and we'll take this back to Professor Ghosh as well. When you talked about people burning through their savings, and we're talking about middle class people, so they'll burn through their savings and then eventually it will hit the EMIs.
Yep.
Will we see large scale default on home loans and EMIs? Because let's be honest, as far as the banks are concerned, middle class people, home loans is the most solid loan to give out. People,
Correct.
The middle class salaried never, actually defaults on their home loans. Is that something that we're going to see as well? Because as we go further and further down this route, but I do want to ask you one more question. As an entrepreneur, and I know that you've put your muscle into Deshbhakt. You've worked really hard. You've been at it for many years, and you reacted to a tweet by Dimant, who runs Better India, talking about how the thing about entrepreneurs is that you never save. You just put all the money back into the business. And now 4, 5, 6 years down the line, many startups are seeing all of that go up in smoke.
So
what is that like?
So on the startup bit, it's very obvious, Faye, and you should get Vivek call. I had a 1 hour long conversation on the channel. Get Vivek call. We are looking at a conservatively 20 trillion rupees black hole. If you're sitting at 10, it's going to double. So right now the moratorium is on. Let's not forget the moratorium is on. When the moratorium shuts down and when the banks are going to ask these people to pay, chalo 4 mahine ka paisa nikalo, then what is going to happen? So very clearly we are headed to that disaster also. As far as the startups and the small companies are concerned, the government today, I heard, is unlocking at least 20,000 crores for the small and medium scale industries. I hope that bails them out. And of course, folks like us, who do not have any dependence on the government, who are working independently. Faye, don't forget freelancers, don't forget people who are absolutely out of the system. Imagine what is going on. Now we have come to the state where we know somebody within our vicinity who's lost a job, who's got a salary cut. And we are just at the beginning of it.
Not somebody, too many.
Too many.
Dozens.
Actually, the number of emails we get, Abhinandan, during the day asking us, hey, listen, I was looking for a job. Senior, mid-level journalists, people who, quite honestly, we can't accommodate because they're too senior. We don't have the jobs either. Where are they going to go?
No, there's so many resumes coming, but Faye, one more thing that Akash spoke about, which impacts news coverage, and I was noticing this in the first 2 or 3 months of the lockdown, especially the first, let's say, 7 weeks. All the newspapers, because see, the ad-funded model is the default model that the media depends on.
Yes.
And the private sector had no money, so they had no money to produce, let alone market or advertise. So the only ads in newspapers were tenders, obituaries, and government ads. When your entire, earlier, let's say your government ad dependency was 20-30%. Now, if it becomes like 80-90% is your government ad dependency, then how can you take up issues that would make the government uncomfortable? And I know this for a fact. I'm not going to name the government because I need the evidence, and I'll do a report as soon as I have the evidence, although we have done the report a few years ago of, some MPs who were heading, some PSUs who give ads to someone who they want to kind of funnel money to. So they give ads like that. So governments give ads depending on who gives them what kind of coverage. That has a huge impact on news coverage
The
and
kind of coverage.
so I mean, the domino, it affects everything.
Absolutely. And before I bring in Aditya, let me just quickly take that question back to Jayati. Ghosh. Professor, do you see this happening? Is there going to be large-scale defaulting on loans of small businesses, of startups, of middle class who just simply run out of money and aren't able to pay anymore? And what would that mean for the economy?
It's inevitable, and it's going to be, I suspect, I mean, almost as large as Akash was suggesting, possibly even larger. Because first of all, the moratorium is badly designed. You know, what they did is just push the can down the road, but the can keeps getting bigger because they haven't got rid of the interest. The interest is then added on to your principal. So 3 months down the line, 4 months down the line, you're faced with this even bigger loan repayment, which you cannot pay because you've lost your job. So just consider these 19 million who've lost their jobs in this period. Let's say even half of them have an EMI. How on earth will they ever repay? So this kind of, yes, I mean, there will be very, very large scale default across the board. What we should have had is a standstill. I mean, everything else is on hold. So just keep the debts on hold. Don't demand an interest payment for that period. It can be done. It's been done in other countries. We didn't do that. We just pushed it on and added to the burden. So yes, massive default.
We have a question from Pankaj Katadre who says, is it possible to liquidate money from the RBI and gold in some form of loan to undertake a massive infra expansion, which can then restart the economy? Here's the thing. The government has plenty of money in reserve, right? It doesn't need to liquidate money from the RBI, does it?
So this is the point. You see, nobody understands that the government is not like a household. It's not like you have this much money and that's what you can spend. That's not the case. Okay, where does the US government suddenly spend 21% of GDP, which is what they've just suddenly spent? You borrow from the central bank. And the central bank, it's all in the mind. It's not like there's this little pot and you can only take out what's in the pot. So the government can spend money if it wants. Now, why doesn't it? Okay. So then the question would be, obviously, if they can just spend, then they would have been spending. They don't do it because they are worried that they will have a large fiscal deficit and that might spill over into either inflation or some kind of an external deficit. And basically, finance doesn't like it. Now, right now, but here, if you just give me 2 minutes, I will explain what's wrong with that argument.
Please.
Okay, so you see, here's the idea. The government is saying, oh my God, our tax revenues are only 30% of what we expected, so we cannot spend very much, right? By spending less, what are they doing? They're adding to that negative force that I told you about, this negative multiplier effect. They're adding to the contraction. When the economy contracts more, there will be even lower tax revenues. So even though they're spending less, their deficit will still be large because they will get even lower tax revenues simply because they didn't spend right now. In addition, the GDP will fall even more, so their fiscal deficit to GDP ratio will be even larger. So they're doing the opposite of what they should do. Now, instead, supposing they simply said, we're going to borrow from the central bank at the repo rate, 4.2%, which they can do. We borrow from the central bank and we spend. I mean, there's no shortage. There is nothing saying you have to stop at this point. The more you spend, the more you will actually cause people to have money in their hands. You will cause GDP to rise. You'll get positive multiplier effects. The economy would recover. The more you spend, the more the economy would recover, the more tax revenues you would get. So maybe you would end up with actually lower deficits by spending more today.
Akash, I know you have to leave, but I want your response on this also, because a lot of the arguments that I've received to what Professor Ghosh just offered is, oh, this is such a socialist. You want handouts. People will get used to handouts. People won't want to work. This is not how our government functions. We don't have that kind of money. We are not America. What is your response to all of these arguments?
No, America is socialist, I guess. People are getting checks. People are getting checks into their hands. There is leakage, but they are getting checks into their hands. And look at all the progressive countries. Look at Germany, the kind of spending that has happened. What Jayanti is talking about is not something that will get her the Nobel Prize, because this is something that is established fact. And talking about Nobel Prize, well, Banerjee, when I interviewed him a year ago, said the same thing. You have to give money into the hands of the people. And the government just doesn't get it. I don't know why, because, well, they don't want to rely on expert advice, perhaps. The fact of the matter is, unless and until we spend more, there is not going to be any sort of a kickstarting of the economy. The government is trying to, depend on few big companies. It just doesn't work in the real world scenario. And we'll see that. Unfortunately, what happens, Faye? Final point. The point is, you and I are going to do this debate while the rest of the world is going to do Shushan. And 6 months down the line, they'll say, "Yaar, what happened?" Because, Faye, the sad part is today, you and I'm sure you're also getting a lot of messages about students, NEET, JEE.
Yes.
And you know what? I put out a tweet today. I said, they're saying, "Why are you not doing an episode on NEET and JEE? Look at our state." I said, I did an episode 6 months ago when JNU was being attacked. You guys didn't understand that the administration was completely taking over the fact, and you didn't support JNU at that point of time. Today, when the administration is completely complacent over the fact that students can't say anything, they will do anything that they want to listen to you. That unfortunately will happen to the economy also. This debate may be not very important to a lot of people, but 6 months down the line, the picture will be different. Final word.
Right. 6 months down the line, the picture will be different. Thanks, Akash. Let me bring in now Aditya Narayan Mishra, who is the director and CEO of CIEL's HR services. Aditya, so I don't know if Akash is left, but Sangarsh has written in saying, how would Banerjee respond to this panel? Okay, he's already left. It'll be interesting to have that angle. All right, Aditya. Do you agree with LinkedIn and with Naukri.com, who have said that things are getting better?
Yeah, so thanks, Faye, for getting me here. Always a pleasure to be on your show. So coming back to your question about LinkedIn and Naukri, what they're seeing and what we as a recruiting company see. Yeah, we see actually things are getting better. While there are, of course, so far the half an hour that we have discussed, we are looking at a bit of a pessimistic picture. Maybe that is true. Nobody knows the future. But what we are seeing at this point of time is that amongst the formal sector salaried people, which is anyway a very small part of the Indian economy, all of us know that amongst the people who work, only 9-10% are in the formal sector. I'm just talking about that because that is what we deal with. We see the informal sector. On that I can have an opinion, but what we are witnessing and experiencing in the formal sector, actually there are two positive things which have happened. One is the sector which depended on the digital commerce, which facilitated things like education and learning, things like delivering the consumer goods, things like maybe something essential healthcare or financial transactions. The digital commerce which
Essential
facilitated.
e-commerce and financial e-commerce has actually done well.
Yeah, and education and learning. So that bit, there is lots happening in the formal sector. Okay, and the equipment and infrastructure which is enabling work from home. For example, could be high-speed internet connection or the laptops and all of that. Those sectors, there are jobs and there is lots happening in that sector. Where things have gone down and nothing is happening, loads of job loss and all that is, I think, people have stopped their discretionary spend. Right. So whether it is about travel, tourism, eating out, entertainment, buying white goods, buying houses, commercial properties, as well as residential property, media, advertising, all of that, I think all of that has stopped and it's in a really bad situation. What we see coming back is, I think, manufacturing of the ones which are in bit of these essential goods and which are connected to them, right? So manufacturing is coming back. Those manufacturing which are linked with the government spending, so that is coming back. IT and business process automation industry is coming back to action because US and Europe, there is a little bit of now normalcy coming back in terms of their corporates, banks, and all of that who are trying to do more automation. And hence some jobs are coming to India, and hence that hiring is happening. I think what will take time is possibly things like construction, apart from the government sponsored construction. the rural infrastructure which the Narega is kind of facilitating, or maybe the roads and highways which government is spending money. But as far as private housing is concerned, except where the builders had to just complete, we don't see those construction companies recruiting. It will take its own
Yeah.
time.
Okay.
So that's a kind of a overall thing that I see. If I can just make one more point, I think companies have understood how to do more with less. Okay, so I agree with the view that many jobs which have been lost, not all of them are going to come back, even if the demand is going to come back to 100%.
Mm.
So a lot of companies have learned how to adjust the costs with the demand, as demands which have declined
Yes.
heavily coming back. And possibly companies are investing only when they're very clear that the investments are going to give them the returns, or when a company has got the investments and the direction pre-committed. For
Mm.
example, a startup where investments are
Sure.
there, they're developing a product, and they need to do it because the next round of investment is linked with it.
Yes.
So these are the five things that I see, Faye, happening.
Yes.
Yeah.
So actually, the other thing that I want to introduce, and if we just looked at that CMIE chart that my team put up on the screen, you'll see that the largest, according to the CMIE, the largest cut has been salaried and then daily wage, a slight cut for business, and then farmers who have seemed to have done well. We understand this is largely because of Manrega jobs being offered around and the sowing that took place as well for the new crop. But I want to ask about secondary jobs and self-employed people like lawyers, private practice doctors, dentists, beauticians, people who run their own little shop or their own little practice. What have they gone through? Abhinandan, I know that we've had a complete grinding halt to all events, all outdoor events, and events actually have generate thousands of secondary jobs. People who put up the stage, people who supply the various materials, people who all of the vendors that get involved in an event, and then the people who go back to their lives. And with no events having taken place since March, there are thousands of perhaps unaccounted for jobs, aren't they, that have been lost?
In fact, our own event, the Media Rumble, which is a very large event that was scheduled for right now, it's going to be a digital event. The budget of the event this year for us, and I can tell you, is probably a third, if not maybe 25 to 30% of what it was for last year. Because who's going to come, who's going to where are we going to get sponsors? Our partners, teamwork, their Jaipur Lit Fest. I know people, we have other partners who we do other events with. One of those companies that employed 80% has folded up, and he says, I'm not going to get back to this business because, as opposed to the Great Recession or the post-Lehman, the subprime crisis, where, of course, I think most optimistic people were saying V-shaped recovery, so now L-shaped ka pata nahi kya hoga. But now it's not going to be like other recessions that the world saw, ki bhai, when the market picks up, all boats rise together. Airlines, I mean, if I go by what NPR, the podcast Silas Roy on economics, they're saying 30 to 40% of the airlines are not coming back. They're gone for good. Restaurants, about 25% of the restaurants are not opening again. They're gone for good. So the recovery may be there in some, that recovery ain't happening at all. And in events, I don't see that recovery happening in the next year or even longer, which means carpenters, which means caterers, which means a whole lot of other secondary jobs. Drivers go. A friend of mine had started off a startup, which was a very promising startup. They also got seed funding. It was travel related. And can you imagine what's happened to her? So, it's, and because of that, many other, prospective employees also put off, like we had some other expansion plans of some other things we wanted to do. We've put that off. Now, I don't know whether I've put that off for next year or have put that off for good. I don't know, time will tell. But I mean, I'm just a fraction. There are thousands like that event manager or in the travel industry who are kaput. I mean, I have, we used to do a travel show, Hive on I played. So I've worked with a lot of people in travel. They keep calling and they say, "Yaar, sarkar se kuch naukri dilao." We have 15 cars parked and we have to pay EMIs every month. I don't have a single customer. They used to cater to foreigners who came. So a lot of this is not even accounted for.
In fact,
Yeah,
if I could just add to that,
please.
Faye, to
Yes.
what Abhinandan said, the marriage industry, we forget what a large industry that was. And down the line, from the very, very rich to the poorest, everybody spent hugely on marriages, and that involved a lot of these ancillary services, the kind that Abhinandan was talking about. And all of that has gone. A lot of that also is not going to come back in the same. I mean, people will still be getting married and so on, but a lot of this is not going to come back to the same degree. And that was a very major part of our service industry, actually.
Well, there are a lot of questions coming in, and if I may just pull them up one by one. Shilpi Roy says, is it possible to deposit some monthly money for basic needs directly into people's account in a country like India, having a huge population? So, Shilpi, here's the thing, you don't have to do it. The government has been bragging for the last 6 years of something called JAM, which is Jandan, Mobile, and Aadhaar. And apparently, through this, it has everybody's number and knows how to put money directly in your bank account, right, Professor?
Well, yes, officially that's the case. I think there are a lot of problems with the way it's been managed. But yes, a lot of these things can be sorted out. State governments are already doing this. And in fact, they're doing this even with people who don't have bank accounts. Odisha has a system of giving pensions directly in public every month officially to people who don't have bank accounts. So you can do it if you have the will. And state governments have actually offered many ideas in terms of giving money. I would say it's not, in fact, it's not a charity, it's a compensation. The government prevented people from working for 3-4 months. It's the government that has to compensate them. Food, we have the whole mechanism for distributing food. We have 100 million tons of food grain when the buffer stock requirement is 24 million. What are we going to do with all that food? Distribute it free, 10 kilograms per household. You have the mechanism. You have all the distribution networks. You have your fair ration shops and fair price shops. You can do it if you want. It's not rocket science. It's all available. The structures exist for you to do that.
Well, Shaurya says, my friends from the US are purchasing graphic cards from the money the government is lending to them in their banks to spend. And here we are struggling with food. So it's not really about what they spend the money on, as long as they're spending it and putting it back into the economy. Aditya Mishra, my other concern, and quite rightly pointed out by some of the other panelists, is the thousands and thousands of students who will graduate this year looking for jobs. Here they are now in competition with mid-level employees who have 10 years experience, who are also looking for jobs. What is your advice to these young people? Should they now actually just do internships, defer for a year? Is there hope of finding jobs in this market at this point?
Yeah, I think it's one of the most difficult moments in history for anybody who's passing out. I mean, I don't think anyone has seen such a situation. We have seen big depression, economic depression, and all of that, but this is certainly bigger than that as far as jobs for freshers are concerned. So, what will be my advice? I think the best one can do is to somewhere stay relevant to acquire some new skills. Secondly, they should do internship opportunities with companies wherever they can get, and even if it is non-paying internship, it's okay to do a non-paying internship, but at least one will stay relevant and one will learn what's happening in practice. Thirdly, possibly to see what else can be done, in the sense something new that they can develop. Maybe some freshers can afford to without a job, because their parents can support them. So this is the time that they should think creatively. And we discussed a few minutes ago about the social unrest. I am seriously concerned about it. You know, and these are the freshers who are actually would have gone into the universities and the colleges or a vocational institute thinking that they will, I mean, with a lot of dreams at that age in the
And loans.
20s. Yeah, also student loans. I mean, absolutely. And we discussed some time ago that moratorium, and it is just increasing, so it's a very sad state of affairs. But I think these are the three things that they can do. If somebody can afford to stay without a job, because the parents are willing to support and have the wherewithal to support, this is the time to possibly create something new, something creative, because all of us, human race, I believe, has always figured out, some way out of a crisis. So maybe some of them can do. We never know. Possibilities are, you can't really measure the possibilities. So one should do it. I mean, I would like to advise everybody to think optimistically than falling prey to the thousand negative ways, the wrong ways which are available.
Well, actually, that brings me to another question, and that question is about mental health. The kind of strain this is going to put on people. Again, locked up in your houses with family members. Consider if one person has lost a job or is graduating from college without a job. There's financial stress. There have been many predictions of the fact that we might be looking at a mental health epidemic as well, on the heels of the COVID epidemic. Abhinandan, this is another thing to worry about. We're concerned about our team members, we're concerned about colleagues, we're concerned about friends and family, because this kind of pressure is not, it's extraordinary. And we've never seen anything like this.
It's been a great learning for me, my generation, it wasn't, mental health was not even something that we discussed. What the kind of childhood that we had, at least I did in schools, that kind of activity today is on front pages as criminal behavior. Those days, it was okay to bash a junior around and stuff. Now so from that generation, when I come now, and I didn't realize that this lockdown, so like you were saying, some people from the team say that I actually have a really promising reporter, he's an amazing guy, he is quitting and going back home. He says, I haven't left, because the thing is, I said that no one's, unless we have to go report, like we have 2 or 3 reporters. Okay, you go report, you do your reports, and then you shack up in office. You don't go back home because you have parents, grandparents. And then, we have a system that then you will stay there for a day, a week, then you go back home, then you don't come out of your house. Because, I can't risk, I had one reporter who got COVID and, she recovered fast because she's young, she's 23, 24. It was well taken. But I want to minimize that risk. I don't want any more people getting it. So he says, I live here alone. I have not seen another person live for like 3 months. I can't live like this. I'm going back home and I'll do stuff out of you from, Assam and freelance stuff. And I had another girl from Kashmir who went back home, because even the parents don't want the children to stay there. They realize that they're getting depressed, they're getting down, because kids who are staying by themselves here working, they come work and then they hang out because they don't have families to come back to like I do, So that is such a huge issue that I did not, you don't even imagine it unless you go through it. And the amount of people who actually, introduced me to this. So I actually said, anyone wants to go for a drive, you let me know. We'll send a driver. You go to Rajpath while it's still there, and see someone around, because it was a huge wake up call for me, because these are things that we were not educated in when we were growing up.
So that's actually a 3-in-1 solution, because you've given work to the driver so he can pay his EMI. Young people get to see Rajpath and note the fact that it is historic and should stay there. And your reporter gets to get out of the house a little bit. So good solution. We should call you on panels and ask you for more innovative solutions, maybe once a week. A couple of more questions. And so Sahil Sharma says, great panel. Sushant's suicide was a great opportunity to discuss mental health, but all that went down the gutter. I agree with you. Not enough conversation happened around mental health. We should be talking about it a lot more. Like Akash said, I have a feeling we are going to be talking about it a lot more, irrespective of what mainstream media is doing. Amit Kamble says, the suggestions that Aditya gave are mostly for people who are privileged and have family support or financial support already. What do you do if you have no money coming in? Kids who have to pay loans, they don't have the choice of an unpaid internship. What are they going to do? Shilpi Roy's question we've already taken.
I think that point that he made, this is also going to make the wealth disparity more, because this is something that, I'm still on the fence on, that should internships be unpaid, because unpaid internships perpetuate a culture of the privileged getting more opportunities. Yes. At the same time, I'm a beneficiary of unpaid internships that introduced me to people who then it helped my career in the long term, but maybe because I came from a relatively, more comfortable family. But this actually then makes your disparity more and more.
Yes, you wind up having only children from privileged backgrounds working in media. And so the voice of media then represents only those privileged backgrounds because they're able to work without being paid for a while. Whereas, children from different backgrounds would not be able to do that. Satish Nagwekar says, you're doing an amazing job. Big fan of Abhinandan. All right. Tanvi D, how unaware is the government of this crisis that we're in? It looks like our own Great Depression, but the government is voluntarily hesitant to bring in domain experts. That seems fairly true. I want to bring in Professor here. We talked about several things, right? We talked about the secondary jobs. I remember one of the first announcements made by Justin Trudeau in Canada was he said all freelancers will receive a check in their bank account, so they don't have to panic. We haven't done that. We haven't put money in people's bank accounts. Our government instead told organizations, you are not to fire anybody. But that's impossible because organizations are going to do whatever they need to do. One of the interesting questions that did come in was Bharat Rawal, who said the Sensex and mutual funds seem to be going up relatively as if nothing is happening. They seem unaffected. Is there any correlation or not? And, Abhinandan, I think, pointed that out. The fact that, there are a certain class of people who have enough money to keep pumping it back in. But the other question I want to bring to you is the disparity.
And not back in, they're pumping it into the stock market. They're not pumping it back into the economy.
No, but let's note
Absolutely
the fact that
right,
the richest man in our country became richer.
Yes.
During this lockdown, while everybody else became poorer, he's actually acquiring more and more companies. He's acquiring investment. He continues to do well. Is this gap going to get worse, Professor, where the poor are just going to become poorer and poorer and the money doesn't disappear, right? It's just value that transfers. So that transfer of value is going to happen to the rich.
Well, it's happening. It's happening very, very rapidly. And, some of the sectors that Mr. Mishra mentioned, internet, the digital companies, e-commerce companies, etc., they are raking it in. Okay, all of these, we are on a platform right now where the Zoom is raking it in and so on. So there is a whole bunch of companies that is really benefiting from this. So that ranges from digital and e-commerce to pharmaceutical, because everybody is into the, controlling the pandemic and so on, which will benefit and which is getting richer and richer. And the fact that you can have a stock market, which is so completely divorced from the absolute reality of 90% of the population, is an indication of also, if you like, the nature of government intervention and the fact that governments are allowing this to happen, unwilling to tax those who are benefiting, unwilling to actually introduce a wealth tax that would give it immediately. There was a study done by one of my friends, 965 richest families, that's all, less than 1,000. 965 richest families, you tax them at 4% of their wealth. Most of them have got wealthier by about 10% in the last 4 months. Tax at 4% of their wealth, you have 1% of GDP. You can double health spending in the country across center and states. You could immediately do a huge amount in terms of revival, okay? Just with 965 families being taxed 4%, which they really would not notice in terms of their overall wealth.
Okay, so since I have you, the last time you were on the show, you talked about this. And there was some, a couple of my friends got really worried saying, oh my God, the professor's getting really trolled on Twitter because of this opinion. Yeah. And I said, she's used to it. Yeah. But what's your response to the arguments put forth saying, oh, you're just going after the rich. This is not how our country works.
I'm going after the super, super rich. We are not talking about ordinary people who have vast estates in Mumbai. We're not even talking about ordinary rich. We are talking about people who would be considered very rich by the richest people of California. And we're talking about that category, a very, very small category. And we're saying that this can do a lot to revive an economy and give all of you salaried people who are complaining about this jobs. It would actually lead to a revival of the economy that would prevent your prospects from collapsing. And
which also help them, of course, the word going after completely changes what one is doing. But I just want to quote this line from the Forbes, this article that I had just come across yesterday. And while a lot of people say, why does one quote American figures? Like I kind of labored through Piketty's Capital, as he said that in India's data in here, to main India ka example nahi le raha. He's taken 6 countries and he has said that India, I just don't have reliable data. But this is the American data. It is that according to the Institute of Policy Studies, billionaires' wealth has boomed while 26 million people have filed for unemployment since mid-March. The percent of taxes paid by billionaires has fallen 79% since 1980.
Yes.
And during this time, the average of the subset they've taken is the wealth has gone up by between 10 to 20 billion. So, aap uska, like, Sean Connery asked Catherine Zeta-Jones in whatever that film was, what can you do with 7 billion that you can't do with 3? Because she's fighting over 4 billion.
Also, the
I
taxation
don't
in our country is on income. It's not on holding. It's not on wealth. So a lot of the wealth we're talking about is in equity. Equity, remember, is tax-free after a certain number of years of holding. So you're only, and it's very easy to say, I've not taken a salary, but all my money is in stock and this is where it is. This is wealth that's just sitting there. Interesting question that's coming from Sharfin Shamsuddin, who says, will the Oxford vaccine be able to reverse the recession and bring back normalcy? I'll take that question to Aditya Mishra. Effectively, the question is this. A bunch of companies have laid off, shortened their teams, learned to, like you said, learned to live in smaller spaces with smaller teams. Let's assume tomorrow the vaccine comes back. Everybody gets the vaccine. In an ideal world, there's no fighting over that. Will these companies go back to normal? Is that possible?
Um, if the vaccine comes and when it comes and when everybody gets inoculated with the vaccine, and it's a long journey. I think
Yes.
we have to go back to normalcy before that. That's what I think. A new normal is going to happen. The old normal is not going to happen. The new normal could as well be very polarized and where there is a huge differentiation between the rich and the poor and all of that, possibly. But a new normal is going to happen, and people have to get back to normalcy because livelihood, the amount of impact that this pandemic has caused on the livelihood. I'm not getting to the politics of it. One always there are two schools of thoughts and all that, but the fact is livelihoods have been impacted. Like Professor Ghosh said, that there are people who are today earning one third or one fourth of what they used to earn, and at the bottom of the pyramid, when the earnings go down so much, then the poverty and all of that comes in. So we cannot afford to live in that stage for long enough. You can see the sentiments today. When we had 1 lakh cases and now we have 30 lakhs cases or thereabouts, just look at the number of people who are willing to, I mean, it's what's there in people's mind. I think they're a lot more brave today, a lot more willing to toss
So
it
you know what,
aside.
Aditya, here's the thing. So if this is the new normal, and let's assume I unfortunately work for a sector that is either events led, or it's one of those sectors that you said is not going to bounce back immediately. Restaurants, nightclubs, discretionary spending. I work for a luxury brand in a mall. My job is not coming back for a while. What do I do? Do I learn now how to be part of the healthcare sector or how to be part of the education sector? Reskill means what? Reskill, I mean, do I have to go back to scratch and find new ways to be relevant, change sectors?
I think those kind of reskilling, avenues are also very limited. One has to just kind of do whatever self-study and self. I mean, first of all, in your mind, one has to really have that. One has to create those opportunities, right? In the mind. If I have been always in the hospitality industry and today my hotel is not opening, then I have to figure out what are the alternative uh, opportunities that I have. That is the first step. People need to see that, and that itself is a huge obstacle many people have to deal with. And if you are able to deal with that obstacle, then only you can say that, okay, I will now write my resume this way, I will prepare this way, I will learn from somebody. And that is possibly just mental preparation and a little bit of intellectual work one has to do. That's the best one can do at this point of time. And over a period of time, I think it will come back.
Okay.
Could I just come in a little bit, Faye?
Yes.
You know, I have to say I'm a little disturbed at the way this is going. It's all becoming a bit too Atmanirbhar for me. It's all becoming that everything, you know, you're on your own because government is not going to do anything
But
for you.
aren't we, no, but honestly, Professor, when was the last time you read a convincing report about, a news report, unfortunately, about the government actually taking steps in this direction? Eventually, I'm going to run out of savings. I am Atmanirbhar. I don't have a choice. If the government is not going to do anything, what do we do?
You know, if there is enough public demand for things, you can force change. I think there's too much of this whole thing that, oh, you know, we have to wait for them to do something and we have to beg and plead. If there's enough demand, I mean, the government of Jharkhand has announced an urban employment guarantee. Kerala has already instituted one. If there's enough public pressure to actually force certain changes, there will be those changes. It's not completely, you know, I mean, we haven't yet got to the point where there is, you know, where we're all complete subjects of this totalitarian power where we can, I do believe that there isn't enough outcry. People are willing to get distracted by the Sushant stories and by whatever other stories. And so it's, what is up to us is to actually get together and demand and so on. It's not always up to us to solve our own economic problem because that's about a broader issue. But I think the whole focus on Atmanirbhar has been very counterproductive because it's told people that's your problem, your fault, and you have to deal with it, rather than say that there's a set of policies we can demand, which can actually improve all of our lot.
In fact, Rakibul says, "Mera idea pakoda stall kholo." Don't laugh at that, Rakibul. So several people have now started very viable sort of lunch dabba businesses from their homes. They're sort of supplying food to other people in their building. I guess that we're all going to have to start thinking out of the box at this point. You know, it's some form of pakoda stall or it's some form of Atmanirbhar on, you know, we don't have a choice. I mean, and then after a point, I mean, how long are we going to wait for government? Are we just going to have to figure out what our natural talent is and how we can turn that into a service?
I think we're in uncharted waters. You know, we're in a territory where I think the modern human being has not been ever. And, you know, I have a podcast where I often used to whine about, you know, when I was young, I've spent a night at the roundabout, the police station, which at the intersection of whatever Tughlaq Road and Aurangzeb Road, when we were protesting on RTI, when Manmohan Singh wanted to have amendments to the RTI. That time Aruna ji were there, Arvind, Prashant. You know, but I've spent a night there because we would come out on the streets, you know, as an RTI activist. All the time we were out on the streets. You know, we did this whole campaigns at Jawaharlal Nehru Stadium. And even people as elderly as Aruna, I was like, today's youths are not out on the streets, they're only tweeting. But the thing is, today, even if they want to be out on the streets, they can't because it's COVID. So you see, there are only two ways you put pressure on the establishment for change. One is through ground mobilization and protests. That can't happen in the physical distancing age we're in. The second is the news media puts pressure through their outrage. But if they're outraging about stuff, that is what we've already discussed, there is no third avenue. The third avenue is you hope that the government or the people in charge are noble enough to want to do something without you asking. Yahan par to it's a, I mean, heaven sent for them, na? Because there is no, how does the public show dissatisfaction? By peacefully protesting. The peaceful protests are in any case handled with the way they were, as we have seen, even without COVID. So with COVID, to chance hi kya hai? And of course, I think social media has made us lazy. I think youngsters are today happier. I mean, I'm not blaming them ki bhai, I'm not one of those uncles who say, beta jab hum jawan the. I'm just saying it's a question of technology. हम सड़ने का कोई मौका नहीं मिलता था तो हम सड़क पे जाके सड़ते थे. अब आप फोन पे सड़ने का मौका मिल रहा था, फोन पे सड़ते हैं.
You know, here's the other thing. You know, those of us who grew up in the 80s in India, in India in the 80s, we were garib. We went to college without enough money in our pockets to actually watch a film or fill petrol in your bike or, you know, to do anything. You were always counting the pennies. But this generation of young people who are graduating now, who are 1 or 2 years into their profession, they've never seen these kind of hard times. It's going to be much more difficult for them because they grew up in the 90s. They're a post, liberalization generation. They've not seen the kind of, penny pinching that we grew up in the 80s. So it's going to be a more difficult period for the kids who are now graduating, and hopefully, they have parents to fall back on, but those who don't are going to perhaps
I think it's
Witness
really interesting to see. This is, like I said, we've never
a
been.
character building, experience is what we can call it at this point, because there's nothing else. Sorry, you were saying, I interrupted you.
I said no. I was saying we've never been here before. I mean, it will be interesting to see how this plays out.
And hopefully, hopefully we're able to come through in flying colors. So basically, it's bad, guys. The numbers have largely seemed true. I haven't met anybody yet who told me, no, these numbers are wrong. Different from, the NSSO data and the CMIE data when it was coming out last year before COVID, where the government was denying the data, saying, no, this data is wrong. Right now, nobody in the private sector or the public sector or the government is denying this data, that 5 million people have lost their jobs, and close to 1.9 crore people have lost their jobs over the course. Salaried people have lost their jobs over the course of the last 4 months. It's likely to get worse. Predictions are this is going to continue in this manner. Professor Ghosh continues to maintain that the government must put money in the pockets of the poorest in order to get them to spend, in order to revive the economy. In the meantime, we're sitting tight. Things are going to get tough. Figure out ways to support each other, figure out ways to reach out to each other. It's going to be difficult mental health wise. Those of us who are in a better place, reach out to your friends and make sure they're okay. That's the best we can do. Try and get through this, because like Abhinandan, Sekhri said quite rightly, we're in uncharted territory. We've never had to go through this before. This is new. We're just going to have to help each other out for the time being, and hope, fingers crossed, demand that the government steps in as well, because, and I say this again and again, this is the biggest thing that's happening to us right now. The health crisis because of COVID and the economic crisis as a fallout of it. We have to force government to put all their effort and their faculties to solving this problem. I want to know, where is the war room inside of government that is tackling this on a daily basis, that's coming up with solutions on a daily basis, that's finding the money? This should be top of mind for all of us across the country. We should be flying down. We should be bringing in on video call best experts in the world, most of whom incidentally are Indian, and getting their help to find this solution. All right, I'm going to leave it there. I want to thank my panel. I want to thank my audience. We had quite an audience today, so thank you for tuning in. We'll be here every day at 8 o'clock. Give us suggestions and topics you want us to tackle here on the show. Thanks for watching. Good night.